The purpose of the workshop is that Region 6 would like to have base level engineering become a natural part of the different conversations that are happening here amongst the risk analysis branch and F&I branch staff, CTPs, and as well as the communities within Region 6. And basically just not wait until it's an actual mapping project and you're at the CCO meeting, for example. Ultimately, what we wish to do is have communities adopt the BLE early on in the process, especially when they have old or limited or no flood risk information at all to guide the community's development. This workshop is a way to help inform and remind FEMA, CTP, and contractor staff about the many benefits of the BLE and how to start that conversation early. Today, we're going to have Diane Howe from Region 6, Ryan Carroll, who's on Resilient Action Partners team as well. For those who have not met me before, my name is Bruce Bender, also working on the Resilient Action Partners team. Shanine Thomas here from Region 6, a late entry. Thank you, Martha, for filling in, Martha Uribe, filling in to talk about grants. Jack Young, our PTS contractor, and Rachel. And finishing up from the field, we'll be having Whit Montague from Arkansas and Susan Villon from Louisiana. But I do want to mention, we also have invited, and people are here, and we're looking for questions from you from the mitigation division of Region 6. We've also invited our CTPs and consultants, our SHMOs, the hazard mitigation officers, the NFIP state coordinators, and a lot of the people who are providing the BLE. So a full array of stakeholders today. Basically, what we're going to be covering is, well, Diane will give us first an overview of what BLE is, if we happen to have some new folks in the room or online. Then Ryan Carroll's going to jump in and talk to us. Okay, what are the many different benefits of base level engineering that are out there, covering all the different stakeholders and property owners and others that can utilize this data. And then we're going to dive into those benefits a little more specifically, giving it from a planner's perspective, giving it how can it be used to help obtain grants, how can you get a LOMA or LOMA-RF. We'll have Rachel come in and talk about a letter, the SID 620 notification, how that's now changing. And then we'll bring in examples from the field and finish up with then, now that we know all these benefits, how can we incorporate these into our local ordinances and when? So with that, I want to point out also that we will be having polling questions. And with these polling questions, if you are a CFN, you're going to get 3 continuing education credits. But you need to answer the questions. Those in the room, by you being here and listening and participating, you will get those 3. But those online, so we know you are participating, you have to answer the polling questions. And at the very end, we're going to ask you 1 question for your details so we can make sure to get you the certificates. So speaking of that, I do have a polling question for you. You'll see this pop up on the screen right now. And basically is, we'd like to get a feel for how knowledgeable you are about base level engineering, ranging from, I don't know that much or very little at all, to, yeah, I know it some really well, to I'm like the black belt of BLE. So if you could fill in one of those, again, you need to complete these if you wish to have the CECs. And Mike, our tech guru, I'll let you watch the numbers slow down and pop up the screen when you feel that we've got enough. All right, so it's popped up on your screen. Folks in the room can't see it. So we have about, a nice mix from somewhat knowledgeable to very knowledgeable is about 3/4 of the room, or those that are participating here. We have a few neophytes, it looks like, as well as we got some super knowledgeable folks. So a broad range. So I'll mention that to our presenters to just know that we have a broad range here of knowledge. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Diane to talk about the basics of BLE. And Diane, thank you. So I keep thinking everybody knows who Diane, but just in case there's a few of you in the room that don't know who Diane is, she's the risk map program lead for FEMA Region 6. She's been in FEMA for 16 years, which I think I've probably known you most of those years, and always with the mapping program. She provides program guidance to all the Region 6's CTPs and is the appeals coordinator as well in Region 6. Now, what I asked all of our presenters to tell me is if you could go anywhere in the world for free trip anywhere and free time, of course, where would you like to go? And she'd like to go to Ireland and Scotland. I think there's somebody else here who wanted to go to Ireland as well. So you've got a travel mate. And her family, I didn't know that, is from which of those? Both of those, Ireland, Scotland? Both? Okay, great. So great scenery, great history. So with that, I'll pass it over to our Irish friend here.
Okay, thank you. We're really happy everyone's online with us today. Let's see if I can make this work. There you go. So some time back, we met as a region with some other regions talking about how can we do some engineering that would be on a watershed basis, large projects that would be available to communities to use, that would be scalable, that they could have in their hands, or have models, this sort of thing. And in that same design, we thought, Region 6 looked around each other and thought, we can do this. And we started coming up with our plan, how we would implement it in Region 6. And part of that is because we had a serious need, and it came out of a question that was always coming up to us. And that is, what's the base flood elevation within the predicted floodplain for that 1% annual chance flood event? So it was always being asked, like, we can figure it out for the AE, but what about that zone A? Where do we get that number from? So we thought if we could do this, and we could have, maybe we could build a viewer and come up with this way for people to get that information, to share it with the community, and to show them that, the risk may be greater than what's actually shown on the firm, but we wanted to figure out how we could expand upon this. And so the term base level engineering came up, and that's where we began. This is slow. Let's see. I'm sorry, y'all. So where do we focus first was on, we started looking at our unverified miles. And we thought, well, we know that there's places that we're not sure how the mapping is there, but we also had unmodernized communities. And by that, we mean they still had paper maps. And we also had areas that we know are not even mapped at all. So that's our focus areas here in Region 6. Okay, good. Thanks. So the first thing we did was we had version 1. And some of you may have been around when we started version 1. It looks, it actually started with less than what you're seeing on this map, because it actually started out with just a couple of watersheds around the central part of Texas. And we had a disaster going on. We thought, you know what, we can start putting this data out right away. And so we worked really hard with the team at that time working on this with us to come up with what would a viewer look like and what would you want people to be able to see with it. So we started putting out information about where is BLE available and where is it going to be sums available there, or where will it be in the future. So we try to start developing this map idea for Region 6. And we thought of the name. I remember talking to Ron about, we said, let's go with estimated base flood elevation viewer, because that was really what people wanted to know. What's that estimated BFE at that point? Next slide. So if you look at this slide, on the left side, just written with the black script there, that's what was on that first year. You could locate something, you could interact with it, you could scroll around and find it, and you actually could do some site-specific reporting. But we knew we wanted to do a whole lot more with the viewer, because our needs in Region 6 are great. We have a lot of people asking questions. Well, how can I get that data? How do I find out this? So we've expanded on it twice already. So if you've seen changes in the viewer, just know that we've done at least 2 updates, and we're in the process of making some more improvements on it right now. But basically, it had a new look. We started where you had a download feature on it, so you could download that data pretty easily. We've added the side-by-side viewing, and also we've added some of the last ones at the bottom there. The areas of coastal influence and those non-accredited levees have also been added lately, but just improving the performance of it. And We also moved it over to the USGS site at that point. Next slide. So these are the three things that you can do with it. The site is listed at the top if you've never gone to the site before. The first three things, you can view the data. You can scroll around and look anywhere in the region you want, see what's available there. Number two there is where you can click on that button to download those data sets, models, reports. We also have a BLE report that you can download. And the third one is where you can put in your property and get a property specific report. So I think the biggest feature that everybody really liked about it was that free download feature. So a lot of times people were looking for the data. I have people calling all the time, wanting BLE for different areas. And you can actually send a hyperlink to this spreadsheet that comes out, and they can download each one separately, or you can just send them the little table itself and they can do that for themselves. And you can actually, it prints out a report that you can do the same thing for. But the products are listed there, all the things that you can get from the BLE at this point when we purchase it. Next. So this is what it looks like now, and that is a very early version of it. I found on an older presentation of what was one of the first areas we had down there. I say it was Central Texas. We had some there in Oklahoma. So you're seeing where we had those data sets already available. We figured out we wanted to have some color coding between the high risk area and the low to moderate risk area. Next slide. The second one was the data download I just talked about. Next slide. And this is where you download the table. You can send the table to someone as an Excel file, or you can actually just download just this data set that you're looking for. And then we decided we'd take it on the road. And so I remember the first things we would do was try getting to all of the floodplain management conferences in all of our states. We made printouts of what would the data look like. And because we didn't have a lot of it available at first, we wanted to make sure people knew it was coming. So we'd make a map. We used a pretty old school way of doing it, putting a push pin in there. That's the one you see in the lower lower left-hand corner. And we say, well, show me where your community is. And they put a push pin in and they go, oh, well, we're working on that right now, or that's next year, that's coming. And so when people hear something's coming, they don't think about it as much. They think, oh, that's never going to happen. I'll see it later. I'll never hear about it. But we knew we still had to keep working on this. So we've been working all this time to get BLE out the door as fast as we could. Make it available. And the other thing we've developed was all the resources you see in the upper right-hand corner. So not only when we talk with headquarters about this, do we have to decide, like, what are we going to call it? But we had to develop guidance. We had to develop the rules around it. How do we develop it? What should we have available that goes on the viewer? What type of products are able to be downloaded? This sort of thing. So we kept taking it out to show it, to make sure people knew it's coming. Well, it's finally here, so we want to make sure everybody knows about it now. Next slide. This is a recent version of what is available right now on our viewer, and this is the USGS viewer. So on this one, it's kind of a green color if it's available now, and the ones that are in blue are the ones that are currently working. I would like to say, though, that the state of Texas picked up on this idea with us. They have been a huge partner, and they said, we will keep working on this and we'll get the rest of the BLE. So they also work side by side with us to make sure that we don't pick the same watersheds, but that we are covering all of Texas as fast as possible. And so their data that they are developing will also go on the viewer. So it's also available for download. So a lot of that you see open right now is actually currently being worked on by the state of Texas. So you'll see it pop up on the viewer. So as we made this data, one of the things we recognized in our region is that we have a lot of paper maps. We have a lot of no mapped areas. We have a lot of areas where you have no model behind the map. So we started thinking, like, what is it that we need to think about as we move to those areas we want to have digital maps instead of just paper maps? So what are the considerations? Part of it was looking at modernized firms, that we needed them in a countywide format. So if we could do that, that was one of the first things we wanted to look at, was to take that BLE and move it to a countywide digital map. Unmodernized firms, incomplete coverage, maybe they had community-based, we could put out the first countywide for them in a digital format. But also we have some unsteady communities, incomplete state coverage, and there's a lot of communities that are not participating in FOP that are in these areas. And so it's really important that we ask the help of a lot of our partners within the mitigation group, particularly the F&I branch, that it's important that they join the program so that it's worth their while to participate in the FOP and have this available too. Next. So that answered a big question for you, but like how we decide like that, not every base level engineering study is going to move to a firm. And one of the problems is it takes years to do that. If I told you, like we used to say, I know I've heard it all the time, like, oh, you remap every 5 years. That's never been the case. We've never had a remapping of any place every 5 years because it takes us now at least 8 years, they say, at a minimum to get the map out the door. So there's no way we can map everywhere. And we can only do a certain number every year. There is a mandatory purchase if we update the map with a new firm that would kick in. So do we need to do it everywhere is another question. But what does it take for us to use BLE to help us remove those barriers to take some mitigation action? So let's think about that. So first of all, we thought about the barriers to for people taking mitigation action. One of them would be they don't have data. There's a lack of data. Well, with base level engineering, they do have that data now. So we've taken that barrier away. Next slide. You're showing them that you can run a site-specific report. You can get the data you need for a location. This also has depth grids on it. So you're looking at, what would be the depth of flooding at this location. There's a lot of information there for them to do this. If you've not seen the reports, when they come out, there is a yellow house or a red house if it's in the area where there's base level engineering. The yellow house just means it's a low to moderate risk area. The red house means it's in a high flood risk area, and it also gives those elevations and those flood depths for those two locations. So also, the BLE will remove a barrier of resources, investment, and capability, the know-how. And so I kind of outlined those here for you. So the resources, we're making identification of those potential hazards right at your fingertips now. Capability, it's being used by our partners to expand what they're able to do. It's something that, a community can do it without any additional training, maybe attend a couple of workshops, so you know how to use it. You know how to use a viewer, it's pretty intuitive, but also the investment. You don't have to make a major investment in this because for most communities, base level engineering is free to them. We're going to put it on the viewer when it's available. They're able to use it immediately. So we want to make sure that, everybody understands it's out there, it's free, it's available for your use. And the last one is the perception of risk. So this is probably one of the biggest barriers to people taking action to reduce their risk is their own perception of the risk. We used to do a survey in FEMA every year, and we try to find out, what are the reasons people don't try to mitigate the risk. And we've got one of the years here that says that 72% said they hadn't taken action because 87% said that they believed that their business was they did not believe that their business was at risk, even though these were all areas where there've been flooding and things in the past. 7% said they weren't sure what actions they should take, and 4% said it was a cost. And so for a long time, we always thought they don't take action because they think it's a cost, is why. But most of them, they don't take action because they always think, well, that's that other person, I'm fine, I don't need to do anything. So perception is probably the biggest reason people don't take action. So we want people to understand that just because you don't see the flood risk on a firm that might be 30 years old, look at the base level engineering, that's showing what probably the risk looks like. If you look at it now, a lot of people look at that and say that's more what it looks like than what the firm looks like in my area.
And I love the diagram you picked. It'd be interesting if we did a polling question to ask how many C3 and how many C4, what's their perception of that? So lots of great information. I hope people who have not seen or heard about BLE and the development and where Region 6 was and where it is today and where it's going and how it's going to help modernize and update and provide flood risk information for a lot of those areas like in West Texas, New Mexico, that don't have any maps and stuff. So very aggressive goal. I don't have any questions in the chat or Q&A, but let me ask the room around here. Anybody, you guys, any questions for Diane about the background? Billy? Great. For those who are wondering, we will be sending out a copy, PDF of this presentation. So we'll be providing some links and other information along the way, so you don't have to be vigorously trying to copy them down as we go through on that. Yeah, got a question.
That download of data, you mentioned there was 2 different styles of download. that you could make. And I was thinking it meant just, there's a difference was either the whole data set for the area or the site. Was that correct?
It's
or-
for the watershed each time, but you can either click individually and just get one of those data sets, or you can say, download this table, and you get the entire table at one time. And that whole table can be emailed to someone so they have access to all of them without ever having to know how to go to the site. They can have the data.
Thank you. All right. Well, then let's keep moving on. We're having some challenges internally with our clicker. So I'm going to be, I apologize, you'll be hearing people say next slide, but let me go ahead and pull up the next slide and introduce our next speaker. It's going to be Ryan Carroll. He's the project manager for Michael Baker International, and he's part of the Resilient Action Partners team. He's got 22 years of experience helping communities and states across the nation with planning, preparedness, and recovery functions for significant flooding events. Throughout his career, he has performed coastal riverine flood studies, mapping, local development, permitting, hazard mitigation, outreach, education, and he's our BLE engineering specialist. So man of many hats. And if he had a free trip to go anywhere, he'd go down under to visit the Kiwis in New Zealand. Interesting. Great. Let's get all of Region 6 done with BLE, and then you can go. Okay.
Then I can go.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right. So.
The chunk is you got to commit to that trip, right?
Yeah, yes.
You can't go for a week.
Oh, no, exactly. All right. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Bruce. So I want to go back to something Diane spoke about, the barriers to mitigation, because I think that those are some of the key benefits when we're talking about what we all do day in and day out here. She talked about resources, capabilities, investments, changing the perception of risk that people have, and data, and overcoming the barriers to some of those things. BLE kind of goes a long way towards helping overcome those barriers, and I'm going to elaborate on some of those with my slides here. But I just wanted to reiterate that because, you know, from anyone from the state agencies, federal partners, all the way down to local and tribal governments, and then even breaking that down even further, the departments within a community can all kind of pick at this data and use it in different ways, and it can go a long way towards achieving some of the goals that communities are working towards locally. And I think it's good for us as we're working with them to understand those same functions and those same benefits, because it can make everyone's job a little easier. Next, Bruce. So let's focus in on you guys specifically, FEMA staff, CTP staff, CTP contractors, anyone that's kind of at that level and has that working relationship with local governments, tribal governments, other local agencies. How is it specifically benefiting you guys? Well, first of all, it kind of helps and supplements your understanding of risk in the community. And I think that's an important part of working with a community at first, is kind of knowing your audience, right? So BLE can arm you with a little bit more context about that community and more about their overall risk profile, right? And certainly it gives you, other tools that are beneficial when you're going out there with those regular check-ins that you have with communities, community assistant visits, community assistance contacts, those sorts of things. Updating ordinances, checking in on community ordinances, just the fact that this data exists and understanding what it's capable of doing is going to kind of help support those conversations that you have to have on a regular basis as part of your job. Adoption of higher standards, and then CRS. It's really cool because the BLE data itself, and then a lot of the different applications that it has, can all feed into your CRS, some of those CRS activities. That if you're a CRS participating community, some of that data and then BLE information is going to feed into that, and it goes a long way in helping you kind of lower your overall CRS score. Sorry, Bruce, can you go back? Yeah. And then just kind of overall goals that we're working towards programmatically, right? So if you're familiar with the CAP-SASE program, here we're coming back to those local capabilities and growing those local capabilities. It's one of the overarching goals of that program. capabilities, you see it kind of mentioned over and over there, and then promoting benefits and drive demand for strong floodplain management, development standards, and insurance. Again, working towards meeting some of those overarching goals, higher standards, and strengthening kind of that risk perception at the local level is something where BLE really fits into very well. And then FEMA's overall strategic planning goals, equity. Diane's going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the session here. Bruce, I would really love if we could
lead hold community and client resilience.
There we go. I can just look at my screen.
There you go.
Yeah. So climate resilience. Again, when we talk about BLE, it's not just hydraulics and mapping. There's a hydrology component to it as well. That's looking at amount of rainfall and changes in rainfall and changes in climate. So again, striving towards helping achieve some of those overall FEMA strategic planning goals as well. We gotta remember that this data is not unidimensional. It is multidimensional for sure. And then outside of yourselves, other end users that we're talking about, and that could be the general public, it could be other industry, it could be other agencies that aren't specifically in this line of work, but could benefit from the data and what the data is telling us and telling them. These goals probably look familiar to a lot of you guys. It's some of the foundational goals of the National Flood Insurance Program, and also some foundational planning goals that communities have already adopted as well in their comprehensive planning efforts and those sorts of things. So, how specifically can some of this data be used? And I'll direct you to that last icon there on the bottom right. This is not comprehensive by any means. There are certainly going to be ways that this data can be used that maybe some of you CTPs on the line are already doing that we don't mention here today. And there's certainly ways that this data can be used that probably haven't been thought of yet or have not been applied yet. We're going to give you some examples. We're going to show some examples, talk about some of the benefits and uses here, as are the rest of my colleagues here as well. They'll dive a little bit deeper into it. But just keep in mind that that the door is open to different uses and applications for these data. And I always encourage everyone to continue to think about different ways it can be used. So from a community planning perspective, I just want to touch on a couple things. A lot of communities out there have, a comprehensive planning effort, master plans, those sorts of things that are very sometimes data, not data intensive, but they require a lot of data to go into the thoughts and decisions that are kind of laid out in those planning efforts. And BLE certainly is one of those data sets that should be considered. As I mentioned, communities have planning goals that they're working towards. Some of those are listed there on the right: overall risk reduction, quality of life, economic development, historic preservation. In order to figure out, what the end game is in a particular community and how to get there, it's really the data that's going to help you get to that endpoint. And again, BLE, as Diane mentioned, there's lots of different data sets that are available and downloadable that fit into this sort of planning effort. And then similarly, depending on the type of, depending on the way some of these communities are run and what their kind of overarching kind of rulemaking process is, and planning strategies, they may have, in the zoning framework anyway, they may have something like overlay zoning or other aspects of their zoning code where this data might be beneficial. And a good example there is if a community does have overlay zoning, sometimes they might include flood hazard data and even other hazards in their overlay zoning. And the BLE data itself can be really useful when communicating through that rulemaking process, either to a town council or a board of commissioners or a planning commission or something like that, how changes to that overlay zoning might impact residents and development and that sort of thing. So a really good, useful communication tool from a planning and zoning perspective as well. I'll touch briefly on codes and ordinances. We're going to discuss this a little bit more at length later, but there are communities out there that are already incorporating base level engineering and some of the data sets that are associated with it into their floodplain management locally by adopting it into their codes and or floodplain development ordinances. Sometimes it's as simple as, and you can go ahead and click through these, Bruce. Sometimes it's as simple as referencing the type of data, and I've also seen communities take it a step further to specifically reference the viewer that Region 6 uses in their ordinances and spell it out a little bit more clearly so that there's transparency with what's being used to make development decisions locally. This one Diane mentioned, and it was kind of the impetus for kind of going down the BLE path to begin with. And it's the ability to determine water surface elevations where in the past you may not have been able to do so, or at least it may have been difficult to do so. You may have found yourself having to contact the Army Corps of Engineers for them to do a BFE determination, and that can take a significant amount of time, or hiring a local surveyor or a local engineer to do that for you. And really what BLE enables is end users, basic end users, community staff and others, even the general public, to do those BFE determinations very simply where necessary. So that is, a kind of one of the bigger uses of the data itself. And I will also say that from a building science perspective, not just the water surface elevations, but also the flood depths and flood velocities, there's a component that the building science folks like to take into consideration is depth times velocity. And that's when you get into looking at, the forces acting on different structures. And that data is available now wherever BLE is available. So it can be really intriguing to those folks to get their hands on that data as well. And then project impacts. If you're a community that is reviewing and permitting development as they should be, you're going to want to know what the impacts of a particular development project might be. And in order to do so, you're going to start with a hydraulic model. You're going to look at kind of the pre-project condition, the post-project condition. Jack's going to elaborate on a little bit of this later, but that's kind of a necessary step when it comes to development and permitting development. And the models that are available from BLE allow folks to do that fairly easily. Also, along the development review and permitting line, you might be able to use BLE data to say to someone, okay, I understand that this is kind of your desire from the configuration of the development that you're proposing here. We feel it might be better configured a different way. There might be less hazard involved, less overall risk involved. So those sorts of comparisons and decisions are able to be made using this data as well. Floodplain managers are, constantly having to balance kind of existing development with proposed development and how to manage both of those. They sometimes need to be managed a little differently. And when there's development occurring in a community, it's sometimes difficult to understand, like, okay, what's possible here? And you have to rely on the data that you have to help with those decisions, right? So one of the things that's possible with BLE is taking that base level modeling from the base level engineering assessment and building onto it or enhancing it in a certain way to say, like, okay, there's a development planned here. We want to know if there's a floodway through this area, that sort of thing. And you can then start to pick and choose your areas where you want to enhance that study to start seeing kind of I don't want to say a better picture, but just kind of a more refined picture of the hazard that might exist in those areas that are ripe for development. On the hazard mitigation planning side, if you're familiar with this process, you might know that those plans do require a 5-year update, and that is pretty regimented. And they are very data intensive as well, or at least they can be, depending on how robust of a plan you're using or creating. And again, base level engineering data just fits really nicely into that process. Next slide, please. And here's an example of how. again, ideally, you're going to be doing this with all the hazards in your plan, but from a flood hazard perspective, you're going to kind of take a composite of all the flood hazard data you have and perform a risk assessment using that data. And just based on this, on the concept of base level engineering itself, in that it's a watershed based assessment, it's going to give you a very comprehensive data set right off the bat to use. And again, supplementing with maybe your effective NFHL data and other data sets that you may have to help give you that fully capable risk assessment for your hazard mitigation plan updates. You'll see in some of this also, and maybe you've been thinking about this along the way, but I mentioned CRS activities earlier. Certainly activity 410, mapping and data, BLE can play a big part in that. But there are other activities within CRS as well, where you can get points for having a buyout program. You can get points for having relocation and elevation projects. And I wanted to point that out here because while it's a component of a hazard mitigation planning process, it also is very beneficial and plays into your CRS updates and those activities. But BLE data, as I said, it's great for helping identify buyout candidates with either the simple floodplain data or the depth grids themselves. I've seen it used to identify structures for relocation. That in that middle example, you can see a building in the flood hazard area with adequate space on the same parcel for relocation. And again, so getting various levels of kind of analysis here to help make some of those decisions. And then looking at individual project evaluation for kind of risk reduction. Maybe there's a culvert that needs to be installed there to relieve some of that flooding that's caused by the road. So, areas of mitigation interest. So again, at a high level, this is, BLE data paired with claims and repetitive loss, and you can start to see then, okay, compared to where your flood risk is, where are some of your claims hotspots, and starting to zoom in and think about what you can do to help mitigate or alleviate some of those repetitive claims. Again, another CRS beneficial activity here as well. And then on the emergency management side, Bruce, why don't you just click through these three here? There are benefits to the preparedness and planning side, the response side, and the recovery side as well. Again, all very, not data intensive, but activities where data can kind of help with the process and fits in very well. Planning where evacuation shelters might go, updating reverse 911 systems, helping first responders get to certain neighborhoods based on the flood conditions that might exist at the time. And then obviously in the recovery framework, being able to determine possibly advisory-based flood elevations, confirm high watermarks, those sorts of things. Here's expanding on the evacuation route example. You see this neighborhood here, and you see kind of the portion of the neighborhood that's to the north of the flood hazard area. There's kind of one way in and one way out. And you can see if you click again, there's a bridge right there that crosses the stream. So just thinking through what might occur here in times of flooding, if that road is impassable, then you've got a whole section of the neighborhood that is essentially cut off from services and might not be able to evacuate. So great information to help from a planning and preparedness perspective, but also a recovery function as well. This is another emergency management activity here that's possible, something that we've actually done for a community that I've worked with before, and this was an infrastructure assessment. So using the depth grids to assess kind of the average and or minimum and maximum flood depths that you'll encounter along roadways, bridges, those sorts of things. Again, helps get at that evacuation route and other types of planning activities related to emergency management. I won't cover this too much, just because Jack is going to cover it in a little more depth, but BLE is certainly applicable to letters of map change, where there is effective data and sometimes where there isn't any data. And I'll leave it at that and let Jack explain that in a little more detail. So just not to recap, but again, examples of how communities have used it, how I've seen communities use it. But there are other possibilities. I don't want to say they're endless, but certainly there are other ways to use this data that we haven't really gotten into yet. The one other thing I want to mention is like probabilistic flood risk analysis, something that's kind of a direction where FEMA is heading. And this data, BLE data, especially the 2D variety, is going to help with that process as well. Something where the kind of direction FEMA is heading and the data that's already being produced is going to help us get there by looking at individual structure risk and what the probability of that risk is. So, sorry, go back one more time. So how specifically can you help there? We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but promoting the data itself, I know some of you CTPs that are out there are doing a really good job of that already. But we need to just continue with that messaging, right? And the different ways to promote the data and use itself. And then obviously there are constantly materials being created both by the region here and by some of FEMA's contractors, and then also by some of you CTPs as well. I know there are some out there that are doing a good job of using your own materials to promote the data, and that's great to see. So we want to make sure that continues.
I will say this, Ryan, I thought that was a great overview of many of the benefits that base level engineering has, whether it's floodplain management, hazard mitigation plans, emergency management, simple things like doing LOMAs and the like, or even for outreach. And I think it's set up well for our speakers who are going to come next, who will dive a little deeper into each of those topics. Let me also ask the folks in the room to see if they have any questions over an overview. Yes.
How about coastal influence? Are BLE considered that?
There, as of right now.
Could you repeat the question, sir? I couldn't.
In areas of coastal influence.
Funds, right.
Yeah, we can consider BLE in those areas. So it's not currently something that exists. But not to say that it's not possible in the future. I don't know if it's something that's being considered. Diane, do you?
So it is on the viewer, but it's masked because we want people to understand that in those areas, and Jack could probably explain this better than I could, but basically you should not depend on it there, that the coastal influence in those areas would overtake it through. So we encourage you to look at, usually those are those B areas or VE zones. And so we want you to look to those, that data.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I think, while it might be a simple procedure to look at, like if you have a coastal still water elevation, to easily automate the mapping of a still water elevation, but when it gets to like the wave heights and wave run up, that's where that process gets a little bit more complicated and will require an enhanced level of coastal study, essentially.
On that slide that you had, the parcels with the buildings showing, was that a separate layers of data that was brought in and combined with the base level engineering data? How would you do something?
That's a great question and a great point.
Can you just repeat it in case?
Sure. So the question was about one of the slides that showed the BLE data in conjunction with some parcel and or building footprint information. Right now, that's not something that's possible on the Region 6 viewer, but the data, once downloaded, a community, a state, or a federal agency or contractor could pair the BLE data with the parcel information or the building footprints to do those assessments.
So if you were trying to develop, say, a substantial damage response plan, for doing your rapid damage assessments and deciding where to focus your efforts for damage building inspection and loss evaluation, you could, in theory, you could bring in the parcel data and maybe the USA building data layer or something like that, and combine that with the inundation information that's in the BLE, you could, to some extent, you could tell which buildings are gonna have water in them and which ones are not.
That's a great point and a great potential use for sure. And especially if you know, let's say you know what the return period of the event was, you could try to line it up with the closest return period from the BLE assessment. If those return periods are mapped, they're not all mapped at this point, but it's possible to map them. So if you have a 25-year event, let's say, and not a 100-year event, you could do the same thing. So with the different return periods as well, you can do that.
So you can project future losses too then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
I can see a lot of potential for that.
Changing conditions, future conditions, yeah. Any other questions? Speaking of questions, for those who joined on a little late, we are providing 3 continuing education credits for CFMs. If you participate in all the polling questions and stay to the end to fill in some additional information. And we have a polling question that should be popping up on your screen. Basically, this is a multiple answer. You can check as many as possible, and it kind of is a way to summarize items that we just covered. What are ways that BLE data can be used? Floodplain management permitting, hazard mitigation planning, emergency management, community planning, flood insurance rating, letters of map amendment in Zone A. Go ahead and take a little time to check the ones that you believe are ways BLE data can be used. Okay, floodplain, I'll turn to our presenter here and just go through. So Ryan, what do you think? Floodplain management and permitting? Yes, yeah, right,
Totally.
okay. Hazard mitigation planning?
I think so.
Yeah. Emergency management? Community planning? How about flood insurance rating?
You tell me.
They asked me to, well, before risk rating 2.0, the answer would have been yes, because we could use the estimated BFE. But now that risk rating 2.0 is not utilizing flood zones and base flood elevations, unfortunately, BLE does not have a direct application towards flood insurance rating. And that's why you did not hear Ryan talk about it, as opposed to if you heard of a virtual brown bag that he might have presented a year ago. So just note that. But what about this last one, letters of map amendment, Zone A?
Yeah.
Yep, great. All right, so most everybody got all the ones there, and just note that the flood insurance didn't.